thanks, company. Thanks, Dennis, for your,
My what? What?
theatricals. So before we get started this morning, I got a confession to make. This is the right place to be confessing. This part of scripture that we're going through here today, there's quite a bit, but it's actually ministering to widows, elderly widows, and younger widows. And I realized straight from the beginning when I was reading through this, I'm way in over my head, talking to widows. I mean, you've heard of the saying, men are from Venus, or
Men are from Mars.
men are from Mars, women from Venus. Okay, that's right. So it's like the ministry to women. It's like, oh my gosh, I have got. So I'm devising a plan within my head. How can I get out of this week? So I started thinking inside my head. I go, okay, now I've got to go down to Nevada working this week. I could say I'm sick. And I can't say I'm sick because Clint's going to say it. She's going to say, you don't get sick very often. That's not going to work. So then I thought, the bus broke down. That's it.
That one.
So and it's like, well, no, I can't do that. You know, that won't work. But I am meeting with another guy who's bringing the bus up from L.A. The bus broke down with him. Brilliant! I can put the blame onto him. Lacks integrity. So that one didn't go. So then I had, the backup plan was, I can teach something else that I like to teach and not get caught up with this. And then I thought back to Pastor just said a few weeks ago, we have to teach through the Bible whether we like it or not, and so we have to follow through with all that. So, the wee small voice in my head was saying, if you spend less time worrying about how to get out of this and just did the study, you might learn something. So I learned something. I wasted half the week trying to get out of it. So today I'll be referencing from the Greek Interlinear, Strong's Concordance, New King James, and commentaries from Stedman, Guzik, Henry, Barclay, and Barnes. Okay, we're 1 Timothy 5, chapter 5, verses 3 through 16, so there's quite a bit we're going to cover here today. Verse 3, honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is a good and acceptable before God. Now she who is really a widow and left alone, trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And these things command, that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. But refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. And besides they learn to be idle, wandering from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not to. Which was my name for a while. You ought. Therefore I desire that younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some have already turned aside from Satan. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. There's quite a lot of scriptures here, and then that's it. We're done. Okay. Verse 3. Honor widows who are really widows. The word honor means to fix the value to price. It's used in I value the price, estimate, I honor, reverence. We associate the word widow commonly, not only the idea of the loss of a husband, but many other things that are the usual accompaniments of widowhood. A poor and dependent condition, care and concern, sadness and sorrow. In the days the New Testament was written, there was no social assistance system for the government. In that day, there was one especially vulnerable class, elderly widows, who were usually without support from husbands or grown children, and without means to adequately support themselves. These are those who are really widows. Directions are given here concerning the taking of widows into the number of those who were employed by the church and had maintenance from the church. Honor them, that is to maintain them, admit them into office. There was in those times an office of the church in which widows were employed, and that was to tend to the sick and the aged, to look to them by the direction of the deacons. We read of the care taken of widows immediately upon the first coming of the Christian church in Acts 6:1. It says, "Now in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution." The Grecians thought their widows were neglected in the daily administration and provision made for poor widows. The general rule is to honor widows that are widows indeed, to maintain them, to relieve them with respect and tenderness. The principles revealed here are extremely relevant today, when many look to the local congregation as a place where the poor and needy should be able to come for financial help. Actually, today, because of insurances, there's a lot of widows that are pretty well off. I'm just saying. Verse 4. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. It is noted that the church did not propose to assume responsibility for older people whose children were alive and well able to support them. The ancient world was very definite that it was the duty of children to support aged parents. And as E.K. Simpson said, a religious profession which falls below the standard of duty recognized by the world is a wretched fraud. The church would never have agreed that its charity should become an excuse for children to evade their responsibility. Those who should be legitimately helped by the church should not have family who can assist them. If they do not have family to assist them, it is a responsibility of the family to do it. Piety means dutiful or pious to worship, or kindness. Let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents. Reminds us of the ongoing responsibility adult children have towards their parents and grandparents. In Matthew 15:5-6 it says, "But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift of God, and he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition." It says in Ephesians 6:1-2, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is the right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise." The respect of children to their parents with the care of them is fitly called piety. This is requiting their parents. Children can never sufficiently requite their parents for the care that they have taken for them and the pains that they have taken with them in raising them. It is the indispensable duty of children, if their parents are in need, that they are able to help them, to do it in the utmost of their power, for this is good and acceptable before God, as we read there in Matthew 15:5. If any men or women do not maintain their own poor relations who belong to them, or do in effect deny the faith for the design of Christ, was to confirm the law of Moses. and particularly the law of the fifth commandment, which is honor thy father and thy mother. I'm having a hard time speaking today. It's like blah, 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 blah. Let's see if this helps. So those are the denying the faith who disobey that law, much more if they provide not for their wives and children, who are parts of themselves. If they spend that upon their lusts, which should maintain their families, they have denied the faith. God is interested always in the helpless, the weak, the lonely, the discouraged. And one of the major obligations of Christians is to minister to those needs. That is why the church exists. That is why Christian love has entered into our lives, that we might meet those needs of those who are otherwise neglected, lonely, and despairing. The apostle says it's something God is pleased with. Also, it is only fair return for those years when the children were helpless and their mothers and fathers dedicated themselves to taking care of them, getting nothing back from the children at all. It's also clear, as William Barclay points out in his commentary on this passage, that this lays a responsibility not only on the family members to take care of the older parents, but on the older parents to be kind of people who can live at home with the younger children. There's a dual responsibility here. Sometimes older parents can be crotchety, grouchy, complaining, and interfering that is not possible for them to live in the home. I had the privilege of, when my dad was in his last days, my siblings did the hospice side of things. And my dad, we had a 2-story house that we grew up in, and he couldn't get to the top floor anymore. So he was actually pretty much downstairs. He wasn't going upstairs. So we had beds set up for him inside the living room, and that was his home. But in the last days, he couldn't eat solid food. It was all he had a stent put down here for his esophagus for cancer, and so we had to liquidize his food, and he didn't like that too much, and it was. It was kind of funny in a way, because we were mixing up all this food. He said, "Don't grind any more food. I can't take it." Until one day he said, "You know, I've a warrant for a hard-boiled egg. Actually, a soft-boiled egg." So I started off for a 3-minute egg, and that was too soft. He was making a mess all that night. He goes, "Oh, that was good though." And so we went from a 3-minute egg to a 4-minute egg. And I think we agreed eventually got to like a 6-minute egg. But my siblings have been very good at taking care of them. And so when I got over there, the first thing they did was bail. They split, until I was left. Because, it's like, hey, it's your turn. So Dad had this little button beside his bed. If something was wrong, an emergency, then he had that button. And so I got them all settled down. And the first day I'm a little bit jet lagged, and I go upstairs and I'm in the bed, just getting ready to go to sleep, and the alarm goes off. I was like, oh my gosh, so I come flying down the stairs right away, and I go, what's wrong? He goes, no, I just checked to make sure the button works. All right. But that comes back to going back to his complaining about the food. The crotchety, grouchy complaining. And I get it. He was getting to that point where he just didn't, he was done. And one of his biggest fears that he had in life was that he lost his mind. Now the rest of his body failed, but his mind was as sharp as a tack till the day he died, which was good. So anyway, Scripture allows for adjustment of these principles to fit the situation. Each family must decide for itself, but basically it is clearly noted that it is a privilege, as it says in 1 Timothy 5, 4, 5, and 8. Indeed, the responsibility of families to take care of their older parents. It's not always necessary to have them live in the home. though that is the usual and probably the best relationship. But sometimes physical requirements might mean that they take care of them elsewhere. And an example is my mother. She couldn't. She was like bedridden the last couple of years of her life, and she would go in and out of comas. And the family would gather together, and they'd be saying, "She's not going to make it through the night." Oh, okay, so so I went over to visit, and she's not going to make it through the night. We'd all gather together and just be waiting for it. And the next day we'd go in there expecting her not to be there, and she's sitting up in the bed, those little triangular things. And she's going, "Look what I can do!" And she's pulling herself over. They're going, "Wow, this is like blessed." And then the next night, she's like, "Oh, this went on for about a year and a half." And my mom and dad had made a pact when they first got married. They said, whenever we go into any sickness, we have to take care of each other. And she would get angry at him because he couldn't do it. "You get me out of here, you can't." And he would complain to us kids, and we'd go, "Dad, we know. We know you can't take care of it." And my Aunt Margaret, she had dementia. She was like 93 when she died. But she was quite funny as well. She could remember things going back into the 30s and 40s, as sharp as any could be. But, everyday conversation, she would repeat herself over and over again. And so those two situations there, we just couldn't take care of her. And feel bad that they were in homes, but that's, conviction when I was doing this. The Christian who falls below the best heathen standard of family affection is the more blameworthy, since he has what the heathen has not, the supreme example of love in Jesus Christ. And that's a quote from White. Verse 5. Now she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers day and night. They were to keep busy during these declining years of life. They were not to utilize the time to entertain themselves, but they were to have a spiritual ministry. Widowhood is a desolate estate, but let the widows trust in me. As it says in Jeremiah 49:11, "Leave your fatherless children, I will preserve them alive, and let your widows trust in me." Those who trust in God must continue in prayer. If by faith we confide in God, by prayer we must give glory to God and commit ourselves to His guidance. Those who should be legitimately helped by the church should serve the church in some way. In this case, the widows would be given the job of praying for the church. The story of Anna in Luke chapter 2, verses 36 through 37. Now there was one, Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Asher. She was of a great age and had lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity. And this woman was a widow of about 84 years who did not depart from the temple, but served God with fasting and prayers day and night. The apostle regards this as one of the characteristics of those who are widows indeed, whom he would have received in a class to be maintained by the church, and to whom the charge of the younger members of the church might be entrusted. Verse 6. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. In James 5:5, you have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. It means to live in luxury, voluptuously, to indulge freely in eating and drinking, to yield to the indulgence of the appetites. It does not indicate grossly criminal pleasures, the kind of pleasures connected with luxurious living and with pampering appetites. It's probable that in the time of the apostle, there were professedly Christian widows who lived in this manner, as there are such professing Christians of all kinds in every age of the world. Clark says this, it does not indicate gross... Oh, I read that. The life lived for mere pleasure and ease is no life at all. It is a living death, whether lived by a young widow or anyone else. Many who come to the church for assistance are in need because they have lived their lives for the pleasures of alcohol, drugs, or whatever. Now they are in need and they want the church to help. It's quite legitimate to say, no, you've lived in pleasure and now you must suffer the consequences. You want to help people, but there's sometimes you just can't. There's a great emphasis in this expression, and nothing could convey more forcibly the idea that true happiness is not to be found in the pleasure of sense. There is nothing in them that answers the purposes of life. They are not the objects for which life was given, and as the great and proper designs of existence, such persons might as well be dead. Verse 7. And these commands, that they be blameless, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. A good pastor will teach these things, so all will know what God expects of them. Which is why I'm not a good pastor, because I was thinking of ways of getting out of doing it. And running. I almost had a taxi lined up outside this morning so that 9:38 I would be gone, say good morning, I'm out of here, see ya.
I didn't make the phone call. And yet you're still here.
But I'm still here. Sucker for punishment, and Mike let me down. Another blame.
Think about us.
It's his fault.
Think about us.
Well, you got your back to the door there, Dennis. You got an easy out. God's normal way of providing for the needy is not through the local congregation, but through our own hard work. In the strongest terms, Paul emphasized the responsibility of a man to provide for his family, to do all that he could do to support them. This is the minimum requirement of a Christian man. If he does not do this, even his conduct is worse than an unbeliever's. Corinthians 8:21, providing honorable things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of man. White says this, we may add that Jesus himself gave an example of providing for one's own when he provided a home for his mother with a beloved disciple. This is why, when someone is out of work, we can pray with such confidence, knowing that it's God's will for them to provide for their needs of the family through work. God provides for our needs. That is, he sees beforehand what we shall need and makes arrangements for those needs. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been given the wife of one man. This is verse 9. The idea is that if someone under 60, they can still support themselves or get remarried. They do not need to be added to the support list of the church. In the early church, that almost always meant that she only had a few years left to live. In those days, most people died in their early 60s or 60s. Very few lived into their 70s or 80s, as they frequently do today. A woman left a widow at 60 today has perhaps 20 years of useful service left. I believe that the wife of one man here is similar to the requirement of marriage and the qualifications of an elder or a deacon. Who are a one-woman man. Here a woman is to be a one-husband woman. This does not mean she cannot have been married more than once, but rather that she is married, her focus is on her husband. So that goes back to what we talked about in earlier on, the qualifications for a deacon. And Pastor went through all that teaching. I believe that's the same qualifications. Verse 10. Well reported for good works. If she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved and afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. They must have earned an attested reputation for good works. The office bearers of the church, male or female, have within their keeping not only their personal reputation, but also the good name of the church. Nothing discredits a church like unworthy office bearers, and nothing is so good as an advertisement, for it is an office bearer who has taken his or her Christianity into the activity of daily living. They must have washed the feet of the saints. That need not be taken literally, although the literal sense is included. To wash a person's feet was the task of a slave, the most menial of duties. I don't know if any of you have ever, I went through a teaching of washing feet many years ago, and it's the most humbling experience. One, for somebody to wash your feet in the basement, but for actually you to be down there and wash somebody's feet, take them in the bath. I mean, it's not that people were dirty in those days, but they walked with sandals and their feet got dusty. And so to wash people's feet, it's actually an honor. Although it's very humbling because they say it's a menial task, which, can you imagine washing people's feet? Jim, come on over to the house, take your shoes off, leave them outside the door. Sit on the chair there while I wash your feet. I hope the water's not too hot. A little bit of soap doesn't, it's a long way.
Wash your hands before you cook though, right?
Cook? I'm not inviting him for dinner. Let's not get any dinner, he's getting his feet washed. Dinner. Bring a sandwich if you're coming over. They must have helped those in trouble in days of persecution. It was no small thing to help Christians who were suffering for their faith. This was to identify oneself with them and to accept the risk of coming to a like punishment. The Christian must stand by those in trouble for their faith, even if in doing so he brings trouble on himself. Those who would find mercy when they are in distress must show mercy when they are in prosperity. Must have devoted themselves to all good works. Every man concentrates his life on something. The Christian concentrates his on obeying Christ and helping men. You notice how I put this into men? I thought it was kind of, not brilliant, it's kind of like a lighter out here. From this passage, it's clear that the church had an official register of widows, and it seems that the word widow is being used in a double sense. Women who were aged and whose husbands had died and whose lives were lovely and useful were the responsibility of the church. It is also true that perhaps as early as this, and several later in the early church, there was an official order of widows, an order of elderly women who were set apart for special duties. If she has diligently followed every good work, those widows were accepted into the support of the church, but must only be true widows. But they must have godly character. They were called to a job, not merely a handout. Now I met some friends on Friday, and I hadn't seen them for a while. They were doing the godly thing. She was bringing some people into her house. Many of us would open up our house to bring some people in that are in need of a place to live. And she opened her house up and had a girl living in there. And it was like, and she said to me, she goes, that's what we're supposed to do as godly people. And because I'd done this, I'm like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. All because of this study. I'm learning. Verse 11. But refuse their younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry. Paul understood the pressures of a young woman to have a family, a husband and children. Don't enroll them, he says, but encourage them to marry again. So he indicates his understanding of the pressures upon the young woman. He did not condemn a young widow's desire for romantic companionship, but he insisted that it be pursued and expressed in a purity that would mark all believers. The word wanton means wandering or roving or happiness in sport, moving or flying loosely, playing in the wind, then wandering from moral rectitude, licentious, dissolute, and libidinous. Clark had this idea on grow wanton. The word is supposed to be derived from to remove and rein, as a metaphor taken for a pampered horse, from whose mouth a rein had been removed, so that there is nothing to check or confine him. The metaphor is plain enough and application easy. having condemnation, verse 12, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. In the biblical order, only those who are ready to be married, who have already fulfilled their obligation and their desires along those lines, were to be enrolled in the special order of celibate persons, not younger women. This was quite contrary to younger women's urges and desires, even though in a moment of grief at the loss of a husband, a young woman might desire to remain celibate the rest of her life. After a while, that might change and remarries. That woman is regarded as having taken Christ as her bridegroom, so that by marrying again, she is regarded as breaking her marriage vow to Christ. She would be better never to have taken that vow. Now, just last week, I've taken a part-time job driving bus. And so there's a service area where the bus goes between Boise and Spokane, and we go to Grangeville, and then we bring it back down again. Be halfway. But on the bus was a young lady. She got on a whiteboard, and I brought her down, and we got into town, and I had to take her to the airport. So there was just a one-on-one situation we had ministering. And she shared a little bit about her life, you know, because I asked her, so what are you doing? Whiteboard? I mean, nobody lives up there. And why are you going to, she was going across to Oregon. So I pried out the story, and she shared a little bit about it, and she said, I'm done with men. I just, I'm not, I'm going to go in and be a nun. Well, okay, a nun. Now go back to the teaching we did last week, what Paul was saying, that young women have desires. And so I hadn't quite got into this part of this, but you have desires to have children, get married and have children. Now if you went to the nunnery or the convent, then you make a vow to Christ and you have those desires, and you're breaking your vow to Christ by having a vow of celibacy and going off with a man. So I talked to her a little bit. She'd actually done something, got herself thrown in jail, and so she read the Bible in the 9 days she was in there. Oh, it's very good. And she was very good at quoting scripture. I thought, wow, that's awesome. But you have a relationship with Jesus Christ. She well, how did I get that? So I explained a little bit how she did it. But it was like, don't give up your desire. Don't put in there, you cut yourself off completely, because God probably have a man for you lined up. As you get that relationship with him and you get closer to him, then things open up a little bit more. So she would have been better never to have taken the vow. That's very, very important. All that to say that. What complicated this matter very much was the social background of the times. It was next to impossible for a single or widowed woman to earn her living honestly. There was practically no trade or profession open to her. The result was inevitable. She was almost driven to prostitution in order to live. The Christian woman, therefore, had to either marry or dedicate her life completely to the service of the church. There was no halfway house. So the two reasons he gives here are, first, they would prove unfaithful to the first pledge, which they made in a moment of deep commitment, but they were unable to live up to. And then the second reason, they would tend to become welfare cases, as we would call them today. Verse 13. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things that they ought not. The perils of idleness remain the same in any age. There was a danger of becoming restless, because a woman had not enough to do. She might become one of those creatures who drift from house to house in an empty social round. It was almost inevitable that such a woman would become a gossip or a tattler, because she had nothing important to talk about. She would tend to talk scandal, repeating tales from house to house, each time with a little bit more embellishment and a little bit more malice. Such a woman ran a risk of becoming a busybody because she had nothing of her own to take up her attention. She'd be very apt to be over-interested and over-interfering in the affairs of others. The word busybody means working all around, overdoing, and then an intermeddler. Persons who have nothing to do of their own commonly find employment by interesting themselves in the affairs of neighbors. And that goes not just for women, that goes for men too. We tend to be a little bit idle ourselves. What are we doing, in our elder years? I know myself, I had a little brief spell of where I wasn't as busy, having worked hard all my life. Now I'm redundant force. I'm not working as hard as I used to. I am now, but I wasn't for a while. And my wife was like, "You gotta get out of the house." You're a nutcase. Because I had an idle mind, and my mind starts, doing crazy things. So a person needs to have a busy mind. 2 Thessalonians, chapter 3, verse 11. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. No persons are commonly more dangerous to the peace of a neighborhood than those who have nothing to do. We're all looking for significance in our lives. Men get that from work. They get respect in the workplace. And women who have run their household for years, that's what they've done to the raising children. They've looked after the house. Clark says this: those who spend much time talking about other people's lives need to get a life of their own. It is no sin in any case to marry, bear children, and take care of a family. But it is a sin in every case to be idle persons, gatherers about, tattlers, busybodies, sifting out and detailing family secrets. As a general rule, these were not to be added to younger widows. As a general rule, were not to be added to the support role of the local congregation because they generally could provide for themselves and could remarry. Paul did not condemn young widows for wanting to get married, only observing that many unmarried women are so hungry for marriage and companionship that they don't conduct themselves in a godly way in regard to relationships. Clark says this: those who spend much time talking about other... I said that already. Verse 14. Therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. Many people get into a bad romance or spoil a friendship because they are desperately needy for a relationship. It's a common occurrence that Paul warned against. Verse 15. That for some have already turned aside against sin. That is, some young widows. The meaning is that in respect to verse 13, they had followed the great tempter rather than the Lord Jesus. This is stated as a reason why they should not be admitted into the number of the widows who are to be maintained at the expense of the church, and to whom the care of younger female members was to be committed. It was true then, as it's true now, that Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do. The full life is always the safe life, and the empty life is always the life of perils. Verse 16. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. Nothing can be more unreasonable than to leave those who are properly dependent upon us to be supported by others, when we are able to maintain them ourselves. This is what the apostle is urging and seeking to preserve in the first century, and what by principle we should learn to preserve in our day as well. Every family has to face these problems and work them out as best they can in terms of their own situation. No one has the right to judge others in this area. Let us look to God to give us wisdom to know what to do and how to do it, so that we might make the family the central part of our nation's life again. No class of people are more helpless than aged widows, and for that class God has always shown a special concern, and his people should do so likewise. There is nothing more beautiful in this world than a family that has learned how to love and live together. So in summary, the church needs to take care of older widows if they have no family or other resources for help. Anyone who is able to work and provide for themselves should do that. Proverbs 20, verse 4 says, "The lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing." As we read it, 2 Thessalonians 3:10, "For even when we were with you, we command you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall they eat." And then, as Dennis wanted us to read all the scriptures again, like read the whole chapter.
You can do it.
Okay. Verse 3. Honor widows who are really widows. 4. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn how to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Verse 5. Now she who is really a widow and left alone trusts in God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. Verse 6. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. Verse 7. And these things command, that they be blameless. Verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Verse 9. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man.
I don't have to worry about that.
Verse 10. Well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. Verse 11. But refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ and desire to marry, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. Verse 13. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Verse 14. Therefore, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. Verse 15. For some have already turned aside after Satan. 16. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened that they may relieve those who are really widows. So this is not really a salvation message. But if anyone's here today and has not given themselves to the Lord, and feel the Holy Spirit tugging at your heart, or someone just wants to recommit themselves, maybe somebody here has got some sickness or some need, the prayer team is going to be over here to my right, your left, in the corner. Come on up, have them pray with you. If you wish to participate in the ministry of this church, the collection can is right. Milk churn is right to the left of the door as you leave. Go ahead and put your gifts and tithes in there.
The little notch on the top.
There's a little notch at the top. Put it through. Dennis put it in there.
Oh, grind it up.
And God bless you all and have a good week.